So we looked at Paul's defense before Felix. We know that we learned who was Felix. Antonius Felix was born as a slave and freed by Antonia, and the mother of the Emperor Claudius. And so we know what has happened and how he became the ruler there. And in verse 27, after 2 years, Festus replaced Felix as the governor of Judea, right? And we know that Felix was replaced by Festus in AD 60. So that is, we looked at. Now Paul's defense before Festus, second governor. We read that in chapter 25, right? So nothing known of Porcius Festus, that's his name. Porcius Festus, before he assumed the governorship of Judea, we don't have much information. Now, what happened? Festus convened the court and ordered Paul brought before him, thus reopening the whole case against Paul. And the Jewish accusers restated their charges against him. But again, they produced no witnesses, nor could they prove their charges. So Paul himself continued to insist on his innocence. So the impasse remained. Paul was in jail. He was not freed, but these Jewish people were not able to bring any witnesses against Paul, and therefore it was like the impasse remained. Now, when you look into the book of Acts, chapter 25, let's look at verse 10 and 11 for a second to get the context of what we are discussing. 25, book of Acts 25, verse 10 and 11 says, Paul answered, I now standing before the court, or Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as yours know very well. Verse 11 says, if, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I did not refuse to die. But if the charge brought against me by the Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Right? So here is Paul's appeal. Paul understood that to return to Jerusalem was to place himself in a serious jeopardy. Right? Therefore, he told Festus, I am standing now before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. Because why? Because he is a Roman citizen. But being unsure as just to what action Festus might take in the matter if left at that, Paul went on to claim one final right he had as a Roman citizen. That's what you see. Paul says, I appeal to Caesar. Roman law in a Julio-Claudian period protected Roman citizens who invoked the right of provocatio ad Caesarem. Provocatio ad Caesarem, the right of Roman citizens to appeal to the emperor, right, from violent coercion and capital trials by provincial administrators. So this was the privilege that Paul had. Why he had that privilege? Because he was a Roman citizen. So he appealed to the emperor. Now, what happened? Festus now, verse 13 to 12, consults with the Herod Agrippa the second. Though ridding himself of one problem, Festus now took another, though a more minor than the first. What would he write in his report to the imperial court at Rome about charges against Paul and the issues of the case? Right? What he's going to write? Let's look at verse 13 now. Can one of you please read verse 13 for me?
Few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus.
All right. So what happened? A few days later, King Agrippa, right, came here. Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respect to Festus. So his full name is Marcus Julius Agrippa, right? He ruled AD 27 to 100. Was a son of Agrippa first, the grandson of Aristobulus, and the great-grandson of Herod, right? The great. So if you look at who he is, Agrippa, he was a son of Agrippa first, the grandson of Aristobulus, and the great-grandson of Herod the Great. So he was brought up at Rome in the court of Claudius. And like his father, he was a favorite of the emperor. At his father's death in 44, he was only 17 years old. 17 years old. Too young to rule over his father's domains. Therefore, Palestine became a Roman province to be administered by a provincial governor. The reason why governor was there, it is because he was very young, 17 years. In 50, however, following the death of his uncle in 48, Claudius appointed Agrippa II, king of Chalcis, a petty kingdom to the northeast of Judea. So Agrippa II was appointed there as a king. In 53, Claudius gave him the tetrarchy of Philip, Abilene or Abila, Trachonitis, and Acra, the tetrarchy of Varus, in exchange for the kingdom of Chalcis. So in Judea, they made a small kingdom known as the kingdom of Chalcis. Now, in 56, Nero added to his kingdom the Galilean cities of Tarichea and Tiberias with their surrounding lands and the Persian city of Julius. As a ruler of the adjoining kingdom of the north, Herod Agrippa II came to pay his respects to Festus, a new governor of Judea. Right, that's what you see in this verse 13. With Agrippa II was Bernice, his sister, 1 year younger than himself. Right, so we see that he was with Bernice, is a sister, Bernice. She had been married to her uncle Herod, the king of Chalcis. But at his death in AD 48, she came to live with her brother Agrippa. Bernice decided to live with her brother. Rumors of their incestuous relationship flourished in both Rome and Palestine. So this is maybe a historical background for what we read here. Though Agrippa II did not rule over Judea, he had been appointed by Claudius to be the curator of the temple, right? Temple of Jewish people, with the power to depose or appoint high priest and the responsibility of preserving the temple's treasury and priestly garments. So Agrippa II, even though he did not rule Judea, He was a curator of the temple, and therefore he has the right to appoint the priest and maybe depose them. This might give Agrippa a natural interest in the case, since it involved a religious matter in Jerusalem. Right? All right. That's how now Paul's coming before Herod Agrippa II. Right? So when you look at, you see Paul's defense. Let's look at verse 17. Right? Verse 17. We read, when they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in, right? Brought in, and with his accusers got up to speak, and they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive, right? Now, verse 20, then, so if you look at that, you will see, he's defending, right? Now, when you come to chapter 16, right? 16 verse 17, if you look at, you will read, Agrippa, I will rescue you from your own people and from Gentiles. I am sending you to them. All right. Now, Paul was defending his case before the king. And so what do you read? What do you read is this. The Agrippa says, I'm going to rescue you from your people. Don't worry. Right? But there's no point in rescue because Paul already been suffered. He's been in jail for now quite good years, right? Now, verse 19 to 21, Paul insists that it was because of his preaching to Gentiles that the Jews were aggressively opposed to him. Why? So he explains to him why he was persecuted, thrown into jail. It is simply because of the gospel. Look at with me, verse 24 of chapter 26. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defense, and he says, you are out of your mind, Paul. He shouted, your great learning is driving you insane. Now, as Paul was making the defense, at one point, Festus actually, he jumped and he said, you are mad, Paul. That's what he's saying. You're mad. At this point, Festus broke into Paul's address, unable to endure it any longer. Festus may not have been speaking for the Jews, to whom a suffering Messiah and a direct ministry to Gentiles were outrageous. So he's not speaking to the Jews. He's speaking to Paul. But no sensible Romans could believe in the resurrection of a man from the dead. That's what he was saying. Romans will never believe you, Paul. And even if he did privately accept as that a strange view, he would not allow it to interfere with his practical living or bring him into danger of death. So Paul says, no, Festus says, Paul, you are wrong. You are insane. You've gone mad. You're talking about someone resurrected from death. Cannot happen. No Romans will believe. Paul, Festus concluded, was so learned in his Jewish traditions, and that he says that he had become utterly impractical. Who says? Festus said. Such a talk was the height of insanity. He has gone mad. That is the reply. Down through the ages, Festus' response has been echoed by men and women, too trapped by the natural to open the supernatural, right? You see, from time of Paul onwards, even today, even now, people say, this is mad, this is insane. Someone who is dead is being resurrected. This is not right. So that is what Festus wants to say to Paul. Look at with me, verse 28. Verse 28, quite interesting. Verse 20, maybe 27 and 28 would be the best to read. 27. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? Then Paul says, I know you do. Then Agrippa replied, Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? Right? So Festus replies, and he says, do you think that you can persuade me, a Christian? So Paul's direct question embarrassed Agrippa here. He was embarrassed. Agrippa was embarrassed. He had his reputation to maintain before Festus and other dignitaries. Whatever he may have thought about Paul's message personally, he was too worldly wise to commit himself in public to what others thought was a madness. So he suffered, or he offered his own clever question, right? Agrippa offers his own clever question. Do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? The KJV translates this way, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian, has been understood to imply that Agrippa almost became a believer and thus become one of the famous quotations in history. Countless sermons are preached on it and gospel hymn inspired by it. Nevertheless, that is not Agrippa said. Agrippa was not converted. He was clever enough in, so it is not King James translation was wrong in that. So basically he was saying, do you think in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? No. So he was actually defending his position. All right. So this is, so somehow Paul came to Jerusalem. Within a week, Paul was arrested, thrown into prison, went from Sanhedrin to Felix to Festus to the King Agrippa, various leaders, like he was judged, he was tried in all kinds of court, very quick, right? The missionary journey, he stopped and he came back to Jerusalem to visit his brethren. And this is what happened. Now, a couple of years now, he is in jail, right? So this is what happened. Now, chapter 27, we see Paul's journey to Rome. Maybe that is something that we need to discuss, and we will discuss that is the last journey for Paul, right? The last trip to Rome, and he's going to die, right? So we will discuss that in the next class.